Hey, what's going on, guys? So in today's video, I want to talk about rendering your sculpts in Arnold. So I've been putting up some renders on my Instagram, and I've got this question a couple times, like how do you do those kinds of renders? And also there's been some interest from some of you guys about Arnold in general, just learning more about it, some of the nodes that I'll use. So I thought, let's make a video tutorial of rendering a sculpt like this one in Arnold, with the goal of making images like the ones I've made, like this one, and these ones. So if you've made some quick, sketchy, poopy sculpts like this one right here, and you want to do some like fancy renders with it, then we're going to do that right now. And also, I think this tutorial is going to be good for you if you just want to learn a little bit more about Arnold. If you want to just dive in, I think this is a good place to start. And there's some nodes and stuff at the end that I think could be, good little nuggets to add to your game, all right? So let's talk about doing fancy renders of your sculpts. So here's my sculpt right here. I did this like 3-hour study from a sphere, so we have kind of a messy geometry. And the idea here is to create a render setup that makes an appealing image, like a presentation quality image of this sculpt, which is more or less a sketch. So I just want to be able to do something without UVs, without crazy topology. If you take a look here, it's just Dynamesh. So, pretty, triangles and gnarly. It's like pixelated. So not crazy, right? So that's the idea behind this kind of render setup. We want to make a procedural material that looks nice, so we can do this like big, high quality, crispy render. And we can talk about saving it if you want to add it to like later sculpts and stuff. But we're going to build it from the ground up right now. So let's go over to Maya. Here we go in Maya. Basic setup. And I'm going to switch it over. Don't freak out. I'm going to switch it over to just a little look dev like layout that I made. Okay, it's just laggy. Okay, don't die on me, Maya. Okay, cool. So don't freak out. So this is the Arnold render view. That's just right, ciao. And then this is the material hypershade. I closed the browser just to give us some space. I'm just keeping it nice and all in one place so that we can do our look dev and our render. All right, so first step, we're gonna import this model. I exported that scene as an FBX. So I'm gonna grab my head sculpt FBX, and you'll see it populate over here in the outliner. All right, so here are my models, boom, boom, boom. So I'm just gonna grab all these. I'm gonna Control G to group it, and then maybe we'll just call this, we just named it now because we're super organized like that. Get it above the floor here, and I'm gonna scale it up a little bit. ZBrush, I started from a sphere, so ZBrush makes things small. So I'm gonna make this generally head sized. I just totally guesstimated this. I mean, so my numbers are not gonna be your numbers, but when things are really tiny, Arnold's a physical renderer, so some of your numbers are gonna get pretty weird if it's like super tiny. So I'm just like eyeballing this as a general head size, but we're being loosey-goosey, okay? All right, so here's the model. After moving and scaling your model, make sure to freeze transformations. Cool, step 1 complete. Now we're gonna make a backdrop. So this is a cool thing that you can do for all kinds of different renders. Let's just grab a plane here. I'm gonna scale this up. I'm gonna go to edge mode. Why don't I just like full screen this? We don't have to do this right now. Let's go modeling expert so you guys can see, okay? So we're gonna make this backdrop. So I can just select these edges here. And then if I hold B and then middle mouse and drag, I can make a little soft selection here. Ho, ho, ho. And then I'm gonna pull it up. Yeah, I'm gonna rotate it down, and oh my gosh, we got a little backdrop cooking here. So this is like to emulate like paper hanging, you know what I mean? You guys have seen this, right? A million times. So this is gonna make a backdrop. It's gonna make a nice gradient, as you'll see, and it'll just be a nice overall backdrop. Okay, so I'm gonna hit 3 on the keyboard. That makes it a sub-D preview in Maya. And there we go, we got a backdrop. Spicy. Okay, now we're gonna make the camera. Create cameras. Camera. And we're gonna name it because we're so organized. Render cam. Booyah. So we're gonna go over the render cam, and then we're gonna position this. Might be a good time too. Let's go back to our look dev for a second, or just go to standard for a second. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my render properties, and I'm gonna set the resolution for the first time here. So defaults to this. We're just gonna start with a 1K square. All right. Here we go, 1K square, good, that's it. So now when I'm looking through my render camera, I can hit this resolution gate and I can see, so I can frame this, all right? Another thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the focal length. Right here, you see it's set to 35. That's like a wide angle lens. We're doing a portrait, we're doing a face, and most of your models are gonna look better like this. if you have a higher focal length. Portraits are usually 85 to 100. Let's go 100 right now. So that'll look nice and photogenic. Another thing we can do is kind of just rotate this model a little bit. She's a little bit more off axis. Okay, so now we got our framing. We got our scene saved, so we're good for now. You can also hit this little lock button so you don't mess up the camera. I'll often do that so we don't mess things up. Now, we're gonna make a light for the first time. So let us make our first light. We're gonna go to Arnold, Lights, and we're gonna make a sky dome light. So this first setup's gonna be pretty straightforward. We're just gonna get cooking with making a nice Arnold render, which is really easy. And we can talk about, you know, how like the basics work, and then we'll get a little bit more complex, okay? So we're gonna do sky dome light, boom. Now if I take a look at the attributes, I'm gonna load an HDRI image into the color. All right, so I'm just gonna do that by going there and selecting a file, load it up, and I'm gonna choose, I just have a bunch of HDRIs, so, you know, if you have Marmoset or if you have Substance, you can just use one from there. I think the one I'm using, actually, Tomoko, is from Substance, if I'm not mistaken. You need HDR images to be like have a lot of data. So they should be EXRs or .HDRs. You can't just use like a JPEG or something. Okay, so I loaded in this image. And also, like, I chose an HDRI that has reflections. You know, you can see it's like a studio environment and it has reflections. So now I've got my light set up, I've got my backdrop. We need to create a couple materials. And because it's Arnold, it needs to be an Arnold shader. So we're gonna go, I actually have it in my favorites, AI standard surface. I can show you like how you would get it from the default. You'd go here, Arnold, shaders, AI standard surface. Can you read this? There we go. AI standard surface. This is the one. This is the only shader you need in Arnold. It's one of the really dope things about Arnold. Like, hair is here, and then everything else is here. Standard surface. You do skin, metal, plastic, whatever. So we created an AI material, and I always keep AI in front of it just so I know what's up. Like, I know what it is when I'm looking at the nodes. So we're gonna just call this model? Yeah, that's weird. And then I'm gonna assign one to the backdrop. Standard surface, AI backdrop. All right, so for this first one, I wanna do like something with color and reflections and really make it pop. All right, this one's gonna be like more of a simple setup, like I said, right? But we wanna present our sculpt in like a flattering, appealing way. I think with this one, it makes sense to be fun and bright and colorful, and super shiny seems like rad, and also a good way to show off Arnold's, like, you know, render capabilities, because just really simple stuff looks great because it's so physically accurate. All right, so that's the backdrop. Why don't we just do the backdrop real quick? I'm just gonna make it kind of blue. Let's change this to this hue saturation value. And then I'm gonna make it like a bright blue. And then I'm gonna make it rough. Like this is like paper or something, you know? And then I'm gonna lower the spec weight. Okay, so boom, simple, rough blue material, right? Now I'm right clicking here. We're gonna go to material attributes, over here to the AI model material that we got going. Oh, by the way, we should make the weight to 1. It is kind of annoying that it doesn't. Okay, boom. All right, so now for this one, I'm gonna choose something pretty crazy. Let's go like a bright pink. Okay, let's see how that is, cool. And then for the spec weight, we're gonna keep it to 1. We'll just lower it a little bit so it's not going out of control. And then the roughness, we'll just take it to 0.5. IOR, we're gonna leave at 1.5. Okay, so this should be really shiny. Okay, now I wanna add a coat layer. So we'll come into coat and then we'll first set the weight to 1. Roughness, we're just gonna go 0.15. So the coat is a second spec. So I have this kind of basic spec that's just kind of rough still. And then this is kind of simulating like a top surface of like water or something. With skin, you always use both specs. But just because I'm doing something super glossy and I wanted to show off the coat, this is just a way to use 2 specular lobes, which is an awesome feature anyways. It makes certain materials look a lot better. So we're getting more reflections here, that's good. We got it at 1.5, good. And the IOR we can set to 1.33 or water. And it's cool if you hit this little thing, there's like presets. So I'm kind of simulating like we put water on our model. Let's do a render and see what's up. First, I'm gonna open my hypershade. I'm gonna assign my model material onto everything. AI model assigned to everything, boom. All right, now we might as well switch to our look dev setup. Jeez Louise, you okay over here, buddy? Jeez, Maya's crying. Open this a little bit. Yeah, let's open this a lot a bit. Here's 1K square. We can go ahead and set this to 50%. Test resolution. We got the render cam set to render. And we're going to hit a render and then see what this looks like. What does that look like? Bam. Ah, now it's looking better. Sick. Now we're getting reflections here. So now I'm turning it around. That's actually kind of cool. All right, I think it's a little bright. Let's see if we just half it. 0.75. Yeah. I mean, look. It's already looking good, right? I think so. We're going to add a couple things that make it look a little bit better, a little bit more like presentation worthy, you know? Already, I think we've got something that's looking pretty good. You can also see that the like use of this backdrop, check this out. So like if I move it, when it gets like closer to it, it starts to influence the model more because Arnold is so physical. It's calculating all these light bounces. So we're actually can use the GI, like use it as a fill light. So if I move this backdrop farther away, I do think she's kind of off center though. So we can check out another useful feature, which is this grid. Check that out. Yeah. So we'll unlock the camera. We will deselect everything. Okay. I kind of want to rotate her a little bit more too. Like, all right, cool. So let's pop out. Let's go to the perspective mode and let's add some stuff. We're going to add a rim light. Rim lights make everything better. So we're going to go to Arnold and then we're going to load an area light. This is the only light you need other than the sky dome, which is for HDRIs, but area light. That's your light. That's it. All right, I'm going to stop this render just because it's slowing things down. So let's do this. Now we're going to make it pretty big. The rule here is, again, very physical, so it's very much like the real world. The bigger the light, the softer the shadows. So if I make this big like this, it's kind of like a big softbox, like actually the one that's lighting me right now. So we're getting softer shadows. If it was more of a pin light, it would be harsher shadows, which means like darker, and the edge of the shadow would be sharper. So by making it big, it's soft. And I'm also kind of faking in this case, like the bounce light or a fill light from the side from like the backdrop maybe. But for rim lights, you could do whatever because it's kind of a style thing. You can actually make the light smaller and you'd get the sharper lines. And it'd be a way to, you know, accentuate some of the details on the side like that. All right, so we got that set up. We're gonna choose kind of a bluish color just so we have some more colors going on. And again, we're kind of faking the backdrop light. So now the exposure, we'll just set it to 10 right now. This is the brightness. We'll hit a render and see what we got. Hey, look at that kick. Another use of a rim light is to pop the subject off the background. It just makes it look like it's coming forward. We're also doing that by the color choices. You know, she's this bright bubblegum pink and the background is blue. So because those colors are so different, they contrast each other so much, we're getting a pop, you know? So if I just look from here, you know, it's readable even from here. But you can see the rim light, you know, doing its thing already on the ear, on the cheek. So I think it'd be kind of nice if it came a little bit more in the cheek. You can actually see the reflection, which is awesome, right? You can see the light. So you can change these area lights if you want. You could make this disc, and that's going to change the highlight. And I can make it real big, and you see it's getting softer now. So pretty cool, right? So I kind of want to get the light coming on the jaw. Let's see if we can get that. I'm also being mindful to have the light point down a little bit. Lights on faces in particular, lights just look better when they're pointed down, in my opinion. Depends on what you're going for. If you're going for some kind of something that looks natural, it always looks better if the planes of the face that are pointing up are brighter. Probably because we're used to seeing people lit up by the sun, I would guess, but I'm not a doctor. All right, I think that's pretty good at 10, to be honest. I played with a couple. Well, another thing you can do, check this out. So I'm going to go to 11, right? And that looks overexposed now. It's too bright. I think it's too bright, right? But I can back the light away now. That's what's so cool about Arnold. I mean, it's very much like you're doing a photo shoot. It's just so physically accurate. So it's really cool. You have those options like that. So another thing we do is bring it really close, like this big fill, right? And it's just like, bam, oh my God, it's so big. This is crazy, right? But then we can balance it out, take it down, you know? And now we got this nice light right here. Cool. So I think this is better. We got some light on the cheek and everything. Maybe we can go more blue, huh? There we go. Cool. Now we're cooking. All right, so now we got this like super glossy look and we got a rim light. One more thing to finish off this first image. Let's also take a look at mesh lights, all right? Here's the next kind of cool light thing. And I actually use this in my Cyberpunk girl. So I did a sphere. That's what we're gonna do right now. So it's like an omni light, this glowing orb. So just because Arnold's so physical, you just get different reactions from the light like this. So I'm gonna use this to illuminate the backdrop, and we're gonna get a backlight. Let's let this resolve and we'll look at the before and after. So here it is before, I'm gonna save it. And now I'm gonna make this a mesh light, Arnold lights, mesh light. I have the sphere selected, so now it just turned it into a mesh light. And then I'm gonna make this exposure high. And then I'm actually gonna darken the backdrop so that we can get more of a gradient. So I'm gonna darken the backdrop like this, right? So now we have a darker backdrop, but because I have this light now, I can make it my own gradient with it, right? Hit render. Oh, light shape. Okay, so we're at 10. What happens if we go crazy? What if we go to 15? Okay, that's crazy. Don't be crazy. 12's a little much. How about 11? Yeah, I mean, it's still kind of a lot. We can call that. All right, let's check this out. We'll save this. So here it is without it. Here it is with it. You see how we get these extra pop? We get a gradient. She's popping off the background even more now. And then look at all these like extra little light interactions in the rims of the details. So pretty nice, right? So with the rim and then with the mesh light, we've got a couple things going on. So now we have this nice colorful image and it's got all these reflections going on, and we just use basic stuff. So now let's do a crazier one. So I'm gonna save this as a new scene, and then we're gonna get jiggy with it. For this now setup, what we're gonna do is make a clay-like material. Now, I'm not personally into the make something that isn't real look real. I kind of like it when it's a little bit surreal myself. And also, we're not gonna be able to make it look super good. If you're into like making something look like a clay, like it's a trick, like, oh my God, I thought that was a photo. That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're gonna use some textures to add a fidelity to the model. A lot of like interest and a lot of like complex detail that's subtle so that it holds up at a high resolution. So it's just little things for the light to do, and it just covers the surface in something so that it's not blank. Doesn't really matter exactly, how you're doing it. Again, we're not trying to simulate if it was made with clay, but we are using some of those surface qualities. We're gonna use some bump maps, and we're gonna use subsurface scattering so that we make a complex render that just looks a lot more physical, looks a lot more interesting, and it helps present our sculpts. All right, so I'm just gonna use some images that I produced using Substance Alchemist, and I started with a material on Substance Source. So you can get textures like this in a lot of different places. What you need is a diffuse or a base color map. A height map would be nice. You definitely need a normal map and a roughness map. I got mine from Substance Source ultimately, and then I edited it in Alchemist. But you can get it from Polygon. Megascans has some free stuff. So you can get maps like this. It's really kind of an organic grunge map. And you'll see that you can edit a lot of the stuff. So it doesn't really matter exactly what you're using. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna edit this material. I'm gonna go to this material and we're gonna call this AI Clay now. Oh my God, we're doing it. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna load a file texture. I hit tab on the keyboard and I'm going to file texture. So here we go. Now we got a file texture. We got a file node. Boom. Now I'm gonna load up my base color. So I'm gonna go to my folder that has it. I actually edited the map to add some little like tiny dots in here, a little bit of color variation. You can see here though, right? It's like an organic grungy map. We're gonna plug this into the subsurface color. So having like these little tiny dots of detail, I don't know if you can see it, but it just helps give it a little bit more detail. That's what I'm gonna use. You can see it automatically changes the color space to sRGB. This is correct. And then we're gonna plug in the out color into subsurface color. There we go. We actually missed a step. If you remember, I just took this sculpt straight out of ZBrush and I didn't do any UV mapping and stuff because I don't want to waste my time doing that. So that's part of this setup, is we're going to make this agnostic of UVs. We're going to make this 100% procedural. So you can put it on any model. So to do that, we're going to leverage the tri-planar node. Now, just like in other programs, the tri-planar node, it projects the texture like in space. So this isn't going to work great in animations. Like if you were to move this model, the texture would stay in place. But we're just using it for like a fancy pants render, so that's totally fine. We have to first go from color to input and then out color to subsurface color. We can actually put it in base color first so I can show you. So why don't we do that? And then we'll hit render. There. So now you can see it. It's actually on the model and there's no UVs. Pretty cool, right? So why don't I reduce the glossiness just a tad here. Let's take the gloss down. We'll do the color. Why don't we just do this? And then we'll turn off the coat for now. And there. So here is our texture projected on there. No UVs. Awesome. Now you might be able to notice some hard seams depending on your model. So here's the thing about the tri-planar node. Because it's projecting from multiple angles, you want it to blend a little bit. So I'm just going to set this blend to 0.5. So this is going to like feather the projected textures so you don't have like visible seams. Now we're going to make this a subsurface material. So I put this in base color just so we can check it out. So I'm going to cut that. So now you see we're going to plug this out color into subsurface color. So there we go. Now here's our node so far, our network. So we'll go over here, subsurface. So what I can do now, base color, don't need it anymore. We're at 0 because we're gonna do subsurface color. We're gonna make that 1, the weight. And then the radius, I'm just gonna do a mid-gray. Radius is how far the light spreads. If you were doing skin, this color is important, but I'm just doing this middle gray because I don't care about color in this case. I just want the light to spread, but I don't want it to spread too far. So I'm doing a middle gray, okay? Now for the scale, I'm gonna change this too. I'm gonna make this a lot smaller. Let's start at 0.15. And then for the type, we're gonna do random walk V2, which is awesome. Random walk is a great subsurface calculation. Blender has this now too, but then Arnold came out with V2 and it's even better. It's so good. It just makes everything good. So there we go. We got it at V2. And then this anisotropy. The anisotropy. We're just going to set this a little bit. This just adds a little bit of direction to the light. You know, again, in this case, we're being wishy-washy, but I just like that it adds a little bit of more imperfection. Again, the goal here is to add detail and subtle nuance to the shader to make it look more physical, to make it look more interesting. So this is just a little bonus here. You don't have to do this. I just put that in there to make it more spicy. All right, so now we got the subsurface ready. So now I need to duplicate this tri-planar node because we're gonna make more stuff. So let's just duplicate this 3 times. All right, so I don't need this. I just need this node. So we got this node. All right, next up, let's do roughness. So I'm gonna do another file texture and we're gonna load the roughness from my texture set. Now you see it came in raw, perfect. That's what we want for roughness. And we also want alpha is luminance for roughness. And we need alpha is luminance so that it drives the value of the roughness. So this is a feature you have to enable for roughness, okay? Because technically we should be using out alpha. We can't connect an out alpha, so this is what we're gonna do. You know, if I try to connect the alpha, it doesn't let me, right? Because again, alpha is just a black and white. It would go into one channel. So what we're gonna do is we are gonna put the alpha into R, and then we're gonna do the out color from R, and we're gonna go to coat roughness. We're actually gonna put this into the coat roughness, which we'll see in a second. Again, because we can control the 2 specs independently now. So another way of thinking of it is like we have this general light reflectivity from the surface, and then we have this coat on top. Like again, like if we spritzed a clay model with water or something, and there's gonna be imperfections in that coat, and that'll be what's interesting in the light reflection. So it's the top layer, so I think it's a good place to put it. All right, so let's go over to the roughness or the coat, and let's set the coat. We'll just do 0.5 for now, and the IOR will do 1.5, which is bright. Okay, so let's see what we got now. When you see that big window come up, that's just Arnold converting the texture to a TX file. All right, cool. So here we go. Definitely light scattering, right? But I think too muchy. Also, I think we're gonna have to up the subsurface samples because it's so noisy. So let's do that. Go to the render settings. Let's turn SS to 3. And then let's turn the subsurface to 0.1 for right now. And then we'll hit another render and see how this looks. Still, we got some interest going on, right? A little bit better. For this setup, I think it makes sense to darken this background. Again, we're gonna keep that color contrast, but it's not going to be so much. So we can go a little bit more blue, and then we can go darker, maybe a little bit less saturated. All right, here we go. Looking a little bit more tasteful. This is our serious render, okay? We're being very serious now. This is serious. So we'll pause this one, we'll save this one, and we'll see some progression here. All right, next up, let's do the normal map. All right, and we get to talk about how Arnold is weird about normal maps. Let's load another file texture. We're gonna go to the normal map. All right, it changed it to raw, that's correct. And again, we gotta do alpha is luminance. I know this sounds weird, but I've looked it up. It checks out. This is what we gotta do. Other thing we gotta do is we gotta use a bump 2D node. So now what's weird is that the way you're supposed to connect a normal map is the out alpha of the normal map goes to bump value. I really don't know why. We're going to do out alpha to R, and then R to bump value, and there it is connected. And then we're going to go out normal to normal camera. That should make sense. And then we're going to change this to tangent space normal map, because that's what it is. That's what those purple normal maps are. Those are tangent space normal maps. All right, so that should be good to go. Let's just do a little region here and double check. I think we're also gonna have to increase the resolution here. So let's go test resolution. Let's go to 100 now. Do a render, see how it goes. We might even need to increase the glossiness. So let's say we want to increase the glossiness. This is how you do that. We would select our roughness map. You can actually name this if you wanted to. But anyways, oh good, it's named now. Okay, so we're in the roughness map. So what we could do is we could play with some of these color balance features. I use this in Arnold all the time. This is another great thing in Arnold. We can edit this stuff, right? Live, and we can like tweak it and iterate on it. So this is roughness, and right now I think it's too rough. So let's make it glossier, which would mean we need to make it darker. Boop. So I just darkened it. So now by darkening the map, you see it got darker up here. We're making it glossier because we're reducing the roughness. It's a roughness map. So pure white is pure rough. I just want a little bit more interest in the reflections. All right, cool. Yeah, so we got some shine here. Let's just take it to -1, call it a day. So here, I'll let this render and then we can see what that looks like. I can actually see the hotspot now. So I think we want to go -0.5. Yeah, that's looking better. So let's let this resolve and we'll take a look and then we'll add the next map. Wait, let me pause it. I forgot a step to get our normal map to be correct. Let's go through this again and let me show you this step, all right? Let's name this again. Good. So we got the out alpha going to the input R, right? So far, so good. Out R to bump value. So far, so good. In here, it's connected to bump value. We got tangent space normals. There's one more thing. Because this map is coming from Substance Painter, Arnold does something a little bit weird, and that's it flips these channels, and flipping green is correct, but flipping R is not correct, and this is on by default. So whoops. So there you go. Now we should be good. I'm going to render this, and we're going to see what this looks like. All right, cool. This is a good place to stop it. So I'm going to stop it. So I'll save this so we can see where we're going. But now we can see things a little bit more clearly. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to lower this too to get things going a little bit faster. Okay, now we're going to add our last map. That's going to be the height map. And I'm going to use that as a displacement map. So we're going to talk a little bit about displacement and some of the awesome features that Arnold does with it. But as a disclaimer, again, my maps are coming out of Substance Painter. Specifically, they're coming out of Alchemist. So I don't know if it's different if I exported it from something else, but I assume not. It's a 16-bit displacement map, and that's not great. Displacement maps should really be 32-bit to have the full info to get an actual like model recreation. But it's going to serve us okay because what I want out of displacement anyways, right? The fundamental use of displacement is that it actually changes the model. So it's going to change the silhouette. And we can take a look here about what would happen if it was really strong. But Arnold has this auto bump feature, which also uses the displacement map as a bump map. And all of the shaders, recognize that as model detail. So even though the displacement of the mesh itself isn't that detailed, it's kind of chunky, using it with auto bump ends up making it look really cool anyways. So I'm going to add that now, and that's going to give me that really crispy level of detail that I want. And then we can take a look at lighting this thing to make it like really nice. Okay, loading another file, texture. Let's grab that height map. Boom. All right, good. Coming in raw, good. Alpha is luminance, good. Anytime you're using a black and white map, just enable alpha as luminance. There's really no downside. Okie doke. Now we need this to go into our tri-planar node again. So input, out alpha, R. And now we need to add this to the displacement. So that needs to go right here. Now you could just click here, right, the shader group, which is this little guy right here. You could just, connect it right here from the get-go. But I didn't do that because I already have my node set up, right? So I'm just gonna make this node myself, which is this node, displacement shader. So you can see it actually connected to this, but I don't want that. So I'm gonna go out color R to displacement, and then displacement goes to displacement shader. All right, so here we go. Maybe I can do this and just make it like really nice. Oh, wow, look at that. So we got the displacement shader set up, good. Now in here, we'll go into Arnold, auto bumps already on, good. Now, scalar 0 value. This is the mid value, or it's the no displacement value, okay? It defaults to 0, which is black. If you export a 32-bit displacement map from ZBrush, that also defaults, but you can change both. And so the one coming out of Substance, gray is no displacement. You can tell just by looking at the map. Here, can we see the map? All right, so here's the displacement map. You see it's gray. If it was black, it would just literally be almost black. You couldn't see anything, but you can see like little details in here. So there you go. All right, so we have to set this to 0.5. Now I actually did a test, and I know that to get minimal distortion, I'm actually gonna lower this a little bit. I'm gonna lower this to like 0.48, 0.49. So I'm going a little bit under. I just don't want to waste a render, but you'll see like when you do it, it'll distort it. Like I actually lost some volume, so I changed it to 0.49 so I don't lose that much volume. Also, we'll leave it to 1 just so we can go bananas here and you can see what's happening. And then I'm going to show you how I'm going to use it actually in this case. Okay, last step for displacement to work. You have to set up your model settings itself, the actual mesh settings. So I just clicked my mesh here. So in the head shape, you can see here's an Arnold tab. Here we go. We drop down here, subdivisions, good. So this is, I want it to subdivide on render. Iterations will do 3. The more iterations, the more detailed the actual displacement is. This is the same thing as subdividing in ZBrush. We'll go to 2 for now. Maybe we'll do 3 when we do the final render. But then also here, we have to enable auto bump. There we go. These 2 settings right here, and we're good to go. So now when I hit render, it's going to subdivide the mesh first, and then it's going to use that auto bump calculation to derive a bump map for the remaining detail that the mesh can't do from the subdivision. So you'll see the effect. So we have this saved. Now I'm going to hit a render and then we'll see what it's like. I'm actually going to pop this back up just so we can see, even though it's going to take a little bit, but I'll just do a region here like this. All right, so how do you think it's coming along? Is it pretty good? Is this pretty cool? Yeah. You can see it working though, right? I mean, it doesn't look, it might not be what we're after, but it's pretty cool, right? All right, so a couple things. I'm going to greatly reduce the intensity. And then also, I'm going to change the scale of everything and make it smaller, make the details smaller so that it's a little bit more fine-grained. So another thing too, a caveat, I'm going to make things really subtle right now because of the type of sculpt that I'm showing. It is a girl, and I think the smoother surfaces and the more subtle detail is better. Whereas if you were doing like I don't know, an uglier guy, or it got a lot of wrinkles, or if it was a sketchier sculpt that just has more brushstrokes in it, then you could really lean into these type of effects because it just helps meld everything together and give it a lot more surface detail. But in her case, I don't want this particular sculpt to have too much noisy surface detail because I think it distracts from like the actual sculpt itself, okay? So let's do those things. First, let's greatly reduce the strength. So I'm gonna go, that's 1, right? We're gonna go 0.08. So that's pretty small, right? So we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. Okay, so now you can see the detail coming through. Right here on the glancing angle, you can see right here's the depth. So a lot shallower. Still there, still interesting. Kind of looks like stone maybe, you know, or something like that. Okay, so now let's make this detail smaller. Let's talk about tiling it. Now, to me, the easiest way to tile it would be just to grab one of these place texture nodes and then use it for all of the UV coordinates. That way I only have to change it one time. So you can see it disconnects it automatically when I plug it in. So this one is gonna be going to all of them. So you see here, we have a repeat UV. Let's just try 4. All right, cool, so 4 is looking pretty good. Maybe we go 5. Let's actually go to 5 and then we're gonna do a full render. So we're gonna do repeat 5 and then we're gonna do a full render and see what the details look like. Now here's our image so far. So you can see the amount that we're repeating that detail. Looks okay, maybe a little bit too strong. So here's a couple thoughts. I think I'm gonna reduce the glossiness, make it a little bit rougher. I'm gonna make the displacement even more subtle, and then I'm gonna place a new light. We're gonna turn off this HDRI and we're gonna do purely area lights lighting this thing. I wanna show you how we can turn it into like a much more dramatic studio setup. So here's our image now, and let's make some edits. For roughness, we have it on, let's go like that. So now we just made it a little bit more rough than it was. Backdrop, we're gonna make it real dark. And then for the HDRI, right now, intensity, we're gonna make it 0. And we can always bring it back. We're gonna make a new area light. Gonna scale it up. Again, we can make it a disk. And now I can go look through selected, and then I can position my light like I'm aiming it. So again, I want it to be a top-down light. I want to be able to see the teeth still. I want to cast a little shadow on the nose, and I want this light to end. So hopefully we get a little bit of a shadow here so that the rim catches it on the other side. But I want to like follow the contours of the face. I want to really like show the contours of the cheek. Since we're doing the light positioning, I'm going to drop this down, the quality, and then we'll do a quick render. All right, so it looks like the intensity is a bit much. Is it because of how close it is? Yep. So we'll back it up. Maybe I can go a little bit more up and to the side. There we go. Now we can even fine tune this shadow edge. So let's just render this region and we can take a look at the shadow edge. Real soft. So like I say before, you can actually just change this by scaling it down. So I'm gonna scale it down a little bit, and that shadow is gonna get a little bit sharper. I think I already like it. You can see the contours of the face. Here we go. See these form changes right here. The wrinkles pretty good. Cool. Sweet. All right, so now I'm gonna do another render and let's see where we're at. All right, you can see the light coming through already. You see how there's the planes of the face are better defined because we're using this light setup. You know, we're really like sculpting the light around the face now by positioning it. We have this kind of darker region. We have this kick coming off. We can actually take some saturation off of this rim too. I think it's a little saturated, but you can see already, right, the difference between this is what we had before and this is what we have now. So it's really showing the model a lot better, right? And that's that top-down light, and that's the shadows. Right now, I think the frequency of the detail is a little bit like scarring, you know? I don't want it to be confused with scarring. So I think it needs to be a lot smaller or a lot bigger. So I'm gonna try to go really, really small and then see if we like it. And then I can always go really, really big. Let's go 20. Yeah, it looks like we can actually see the repeat. So that's no bueno. So let's go 2 and 2. Okay, I think this might be better. Cool. Since we're here, let's pull a little bit of color out of the rim here. Maybe we even lower the intensity. We can always make the mesh light brighter still. So we're still getting like illumination like around the edges of the hair and the earrings. But this way the rim or the fill on this other side here is not so much. All right, cool. Maybe it's a little much, but I kind of like it for now, so we could leave it for now. Last little bit. I think the subsurface is a tiny bit much, so I'm going to reduce the scale just a bit. All right, this looks pretty good. I think we could just render this right now and call it a day, but let's like make it just a little bit spicier. What I want to do is I want to use a curvature node so we can pop out all the little edge detail. All right. So this is another good little lesson for people into Arnold. We're going to use a couple more nodes now, and we're going to up the level. Okay. We're going to turn this clay to 11 right now. That's such an old reference, dude. Nobody knows what that's from. Okay. So we're going to do AI curvature, and we're going to do an AI composite node. Okay. So we got extra nodes coming on here. So what do I want to do here? What I want to do is use the curvature node to make pick up the small edge detail of not only our model, but the surface detail that we've applied. And I'm going to mix it together with the diffuse map itself. And then because that's plugged into the subsurface color, there's going to be some cool light interaction. And really what we're going to get out of this is just more crispy details. And we get to use some extra nodes. Here we go. We got to get it after the tri-planar node. So this is the diffuse. And then we're going to go out color to A. Good. So now we got the tri-planar projected base color going into A. And then we're going to put the curvature into B, which is like the second layer, which you'll see that makes sense in a second. And we're going to connect the composite node. Okay. So now we've got this extra thing in here. The composite node, we can tell it its operation or its blend type, and we can change that to screen. So screen is just the lights. Same thing in Photoshop, right? It's just the light values. More white is more opaque, and black is completely transparent. So we're going to use the curvature to make a black and white input that's going to screen on top of the diffuse. You see what I'm going to talk about in a second. All right, so I'm going to select the curvature, and I'm going to hit this button right here, which is isolate selected. So now I'm going to hit render. Now I'm looking at the curvature, and then we'll get to see what we're cooking with here. So radius, I'm going to put to 1. Spread, we're going to drop to 0.9. Threshold, let's up this to 0.85 maybe. Kind of a bug. I had to click tri-planar and back because there's kind of a bug updating. But here you go. Now you can see it, right? Here's the curvature. And you can see it's picking up the details. So I just want the edges though. So I'm going to start playing with this stuff. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Bias will go 5, and we can up the multiply. The multiply is like the value. I'm going to dial that in once I get what I want. But let's keep it at 2 right now. So let's see if I drop it. Nope. 8.5. No. Okay, now we're getting some edges here. So I'm looking for white on the edges, but then still a little bit of detail, like hopefully some sharp detail. And let's just see what it looks like. Okay, a little too muchy. All right, so now when we do the render, you can see this edge getting brighter, right? Kind of looks more chalky, more waxy. All right, so now you can see by doing that, we get some more extra like interest in the shader that's based on the model itself, as well as the little texture details in the maps. To mix it even better, we could even darken the base color, again, by going into the file node itself, and then we could lower the exposure just a tad. Getting a little extra chalky in here so we can go to the curvature. We can take the multiply down to like 0.7. So now we're still getting light edge detail, but the contrast isn't as high. Cool, that looks cool. Yeah, so I think we're good here. Now, the next step is to make this a final image, right? To make it full quality. So a couple things. We're going to turn on the depth of field in the camera. Got to have that DOF, dude. Got to have the DOF. And then we're also going to up the samples of the lights and do we're just going to do higher quality render settings. So first things first, let's go to the render cam. So let's turn off the grid. Here's a little trick on how I do my depth of field. We're going to create a locator. When you create things, it's automatically selected. So I'm going to hold V on the keyboard, and then you can put this wherever you want. It's so laggy. I don't know why. All right, we're just going to get this in the eye. And I'm going to scale this locator up. And now we're going to jump back in the render cam. Here we go. I can just select this locator now whenever I want. And I'll go display, heads up display, object details. And this tells me how far it is from the camera. 22.6. So that's my focal distance. In the render cam shape, we'll come down here to the Arnold tab. And then enable the DOF, and then 22.6, and then aperture size, let's start at 0.5. All right, now we're gonna come over here and we're just gonna do a strip so we can see the roll off of the focus here. All right, so we can already see we're super out of focus on the ear, probably too much. I want it to be subtle in this case. You can go as ham as you want with this, but I'm going a lot more subtle for this image overall, right? So let's go 0.15. And then I'm just gonna go eye to ear here. Yeah, that's nice. So it's out of focus and the eye is in focus. That's pretty good. All right, so aperture size, I think we're good. We got the depth of field going, perfect. Now the last thing to do, remember to do this too for your renders, is the light samples actually. You see here the samples in this light is 1, we gotta hit that to 2. So if you didn't do this step, the light itself would have noise in it. So even if you did a super high render settings, which is what we're doing right now, we come over here. This is for the samples, so this gets rid of noise, right? So we're gonna go up in these. We're also gonna go advanced, use auto bump in SSS. So that's pretty cool too. So now that's gonna, again, it's gonna take a longer to calculate. So now this image is gonna take a while. And also we can go test resolution 200%. For a 1K, this is probably gonna take a few minutes, but now we're gonna render it. We'll see it in its full quality and see what we got. Before we do that, actually, I feel like making the background even darker. All right, cool. So this is what we had a moment ago. Let's let this resolve and see how it looks. All right, here is our render. Let's hit stop and let's save this bad boy because this took a while. This took 7.5 minutes. You can see we can still resolve it even more. This is also 1K, so I'm gonna render this with a little bit higher samples. I'm gonna go 6 right here probably. Let's talk about exporting this. So say this is your final image and you're ready to export. You need to come up here and go File, Save Image. You wanna navigate to where you wanna save these images. And then you want to name it, so I'm going to name it Clay02 in this case. Then you need to add .exr. You could also add .jpeg. You could add .png. So this is kind of a weird quirk about saving stuff from the Arnold renderer. I'm not sure if all versions of Maya and Arnold are like this, but it's just a strange thing that's pretty unconventional to know that you have to add the file extension to get the kind of file that you want. Now we want to do EXR because that's the highest quality image. That's going to be, 32 bits. It's going to be a big image. But then you can convert that to 16-bit in Photoshop, which still gets you plenty of room to play around with it. Like say we save it right now. Last little note I'll mention is something that you can do. Maybe you don't want the backdrop. Maybe you want it just for the bounce. Well, you can come over here in the Arnold settings of the mesh shape right here. You can turn off primary visibility. And then when you render, it's going to be all black. But when you save that EXR, it's going to come in. You can make it come in as a transparency. And then you could just do whatever you want for the background. You could leave it black. A lot of my images, I just leave it as a black void. But you could also just paint your own gradients or put any kind of background you want. So that's another choice that you have too when you're making your final composition. All right, so I want to show you my settings for the final image that I made. So in my render settings here, if you come over to the Common tab, you see I changed the dimensions from 1K. I just put in the portrait dimensions for Instagram because I knew I was going to share it there, and it takes up more space and it's a good resolution for, the portrait. And I can render this larger too for extra details. So in the Arnold render tab, you can see what I put in for my samples. I did 6 camera samples, then I did 3 everywhere else except for volume. And then in adaptive, I enabled it and I set this to 12. So what adaptive sampling is instead of changing this number to 12, which would take a really long time on my machine, it would take hours. We're setting this to 6. And then this adaptive sample is like using this threshold of pixels to figure out if it's noisy, it needs to up the samples. And this is the maximum it would go to. So kind of on a pixel by pixel basis, you might want to think of it that way. It can go to 12 if it deems it necessary. So this is just a way where I can get a little bit of a shorter render time, but get a smoother render. And because I'm using depth of field, that really comes in handy. So let's pop over and check out the final image. So here's the final image in Photoshop. I just wanted to show you how I make my final images. I render it out with transparency. So when I open the image in Photoshop, I say to use transparency, and you can see it just naturally does that as long as you don't have any objects in the background. So you get this clean matte already. Then I get to build my background how I want. I get to choose colors if I want to do a little bit more color, the value, and then I make the gradient myself. So this gives me the most control. I get to experiment, and then I did some color correcting a little bit. If we pop in here, we can take a look. So I just did a little bit of texture sharpening, added a little bit of warmth and color. So there's some subtle blue in the background, subtle warmth in the character just to give it some color so it's not desaturated, and pop it off the background, make it a little bit more interesting. But this is how I do my final renders for presentation of my sculpts. And now that I have this material, you can save it. So if you come over here, I could click this AI clay right here, and I could export selected network. And then I would be able to load that material, and it would come in with the textures too. So that's what I do. You could also just save this scene, which I also do. You could just bring in different models here, and it's already set up for you. And you could just assign this material, and it's all procedural. You don't need UVs. So that's what's cool about this setup. And this is how I do my renders for my quick sculpts and studies and stuff, if I want to make them a little bit more presentable. So I hope you learned some stuff. I hope you give Arnold a shot. It is my favorite renderer right now. And this is how I do my own stuff. So if you do end up using this kind of method to make your own renders of your sculpts, I'd love to see them. So definitely tag me on social media if you're going to post them there. You can also come hang out in the Discord, ask questions, and share work in progress there with some other people that like to do CG art. So that is it for this video. Hit the like button if you did like it or you learned something. Subscribe if you are into videos like this. And until the next one, peace out.